juniors joining us today, but about a quarter sophomores and about a quarter freshmen. So that's what we're looking. Is everybody able to see the results? I just want to make sure. Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce myself and also introduce the panelists. And panelists, this might help kind of drive your question or your answers a little bit if you know that the range of where these students are coming from. But it looks like we've got mostly juniors and some freshmen and sophomores as well. Great, thank you. All right, so I'll start. I am Brooke Delosio. I'll moderate the session today. I teach for the College of Business. I teach mostly like the freshman business courses. Carmen, if you want to introduce yourself, this is going to be our tech assistant today.
Hello, everyone. I am your tech assistant for today. I will also be monitoring the chat. I am the assistant dean within the College of Business.
All right, and then I'll go in order, if that's all right with everyone. I'm just going to go in order that they're listed, which is in no particular order at all. So I'll have Nicole start.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Nicole Wilkinson. I'm an HR generalist at Ocean State Job Law. I've been with the company for 4 years, and I actually started right after finishing my collegiate career at the University of Rhode Island. Thank you.
Welcome, Nicole. Greg?
I'm Greg Welsh. I'm class of 2009, supply chain major, and I've been in the procurement world of the supply chain umbrella for the last, whatever that is, 11 or 12 years. I started at Citizens Bank with an internship out of as a graduating senior, turned that into a full-time role, moved on to John Hancock's procurement organization in Boston. Ultimately, then I converted into going to on the more consulting side of the business, working for IBM and how they do operations for other customers. So I've had a number of different clients since then. My resume still says IBM, but I've had clients all over other sectors like healthcare, high technology, semiconductor, to run-of-the-mill mom and pops and book publishers. So it's kind of all over the board, but my resume still says IBM consistently.
Thanks, Greg. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Brooke, and good morning, everybody. So I also, you guys are pretty lucky. Greg and I graduated together. I think there were 7 supply chain graduates in total in 2009, and you've got 2 of them. So I'm the director of retail business development at CHEP. Prior to that, I worked for Best Buy in distribution operations. CHEP, if you're not familiar, and a lot of you probably aren't, if you see these blue pallets in the background of my screen here, those are ours. If you go to a Walmart or whatnot, we are a pallet pooling company. So very much involved in the supply chain, kind of the backbone of the supply chain. We've got about 80 billion pallets across the US. And I've done a variety of things, worked in, like I said, distribution operations. I've been in retail sales. Currently, I manage a few different areas of our business, the development of a small truck fleet across the US. I also oversee, as my title says, business development. So I'm in charge of our Amazon account, some other large national customers. And then I'm also involved in some of our global strategy work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. And Kim.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I graduated URI in '91. I went on to get a master's in teaching, a second master's in organizational development, and my PhD in business. I've been largely the senior most person on talent in a number of organizations. So started at Bank of Boston and went to Bank Boston Mortgage Corporation, worked with Alvarecchia for 10 years at Hasbro from there, and was Chief Talent Officer, Chief Diversity Officer there. Went to Bank of America as the Senior Vice President of Leadership Development. And then Heinz, the consumer packaged goods company, because you might have ketchup in your refrigerator. I was the Chief Talent Officer at Heinz. I built my own business, and that was started about 8 years ago. I do a tremendous amount of executive coaching around the world, but I also work with organizations to help transform. It could be M&A or standing up an IPO, lots of strategic planning work, business transformation, culture work, etc. I coach and teach for Harvard through their executive education programs. I'm a published author as well. I write for Forbes and have several books. And then the other side of my life is I run a championship show stables. So we buy, breed, build, compete, and sell high-end show jumpers. So if you think about the Olympics, and think about that stadium jumping, that's what we do, and working to help my kids get to the World Cup. So, and URI gave me a great launch on that path. So thanks for having me.
That's wonderful. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the stories that you have to share and all of the advice that you'll give to our undergraduates. So we're going to just start it off with a few questions, but it's really going to be, again, student-led if possible. So students, if you have questions, I just want to remind you again, please feel free to put them in the chat because I have some questions, but I already have a job. So I'd rather it be led by your questions if you have some. But I'm going to start by just asking the panelists, and you can just jump in. But how do you think candidates should go about starting this search for their job?
I can start. So, my mantra here for getting started is making sure that you've gotten everything cleaned up on your own profiles, your own resume, your own experience, everything you have out online, really everything that you have in your own control. Make sure you get that under control first. Before you start getting too concerned with what company should I apply for and what job and what industry, don't get too far down the road before you've really put your best foot forward in the first place. So before you do anything, make sure you've tightened up your own profile. So meaning specifically LinkedIn in your resume, making sure that that's tight. It has a lot of keywords in it that are going to trick the algorithms to selecting you to meet the criteria for the internships and roles they're looking for. Because ultimately a lot of this is technology based these days. You're likely not going to have someone reading through thousands of resumes. So you need to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward in terms of how you look to a robot and how you look online. So that would be my first recommendation. And we can always talk about what companies and roles separately, but that's number one.
I'll jump in. I've got 3 suggestions, and I think what was just offered was really brilliant, and I would take that to the bank, no pun intended. So the 3 suggestions are to first do some informational interviews. Who is doing work that you're interested in? LinkedIn is very rich with many people who can give you a slice of not only what they do, but how they got there. And I have found that most people will give you 10 or 15 minutes. And especially if you say, I'm a college career and I would love to pick your brain on your journey for 10 or 15 minutes, a lot of people will take you up on that. The second suggestion is run this like it's a project. So if you get into a corporation, you're going to have to probably learn project management. And so watch a couple of videos on YouTube on how to structure something in terms of a project and project management, and run it with that level of accountability and time bound and deliverables, et cetera. And then the last piece is practice interviewing and make sure that you're actually verbalizing your answers. Don't practice in your head, but say a response to various questions. And if you need a list of questions, I can certainly share some with you, but actually articulate it, because very often it takes 8 or 10 times to be able to develop a comfort level in spinning our message. So those 3 suggestions are what I would offer.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. I think those are great suggestions, and I would agree with everything that was said. And to kind of take it to that next phase of the process, when you're actually looking at, as Greg said, what company should I apply into, what jobs, I think Kim's note around do some informational interviews, some reverse interviews are great. My biggest piece of advice would be don't limit yourself to looking for the perfect job. I think you may get a lot of benefit. I know for me, when I graduated, this nice fancy college degree I paid all this money for, I didn't anticipate I was going to go work as a warehouse supervisor. And it was a huge building or foundation for my career. So go into it with an open mind. It may seem like something where at first you're like, I don't know if that's really what I want to be doing, but give it some thought. And again, there's so many opportunities out there, especially with how remote everything's going, that there's going to be a lot of things that maybe at first glance you're thinking, I really wanted to be in this one specific area, but they may be the thing that gives you other interest or leads you to that area eventually.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just wanted to echo what Kim had said is leveraging LinkedIn as that platform to make connections with people who have, you know, careers or journeys that are
Oh, Nicole, we're having a little bit of an issue hearing you. I'm not sure what happened, but oh, sorry. Yeah, Nicole, I'm so sorry. We can't hear what you were saying. I'm not sure if there was something wrong with your sound. I apologize. Could you try to maybe repeat your comment?
Yeah, sorry, my internet is like telling me it's unstable. But I just echoed what Kim had mentioned about leveraging LinkedIn to build those connections and possibly a mentor.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, Liz, did you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Sure. I was wondering, as far as, I'm a freshman in college, so I'm, still getting used to like what I want to be involved in. So when you guys are recruiting, what are things you're looking for that really like stand out on people's involvements or just college resume in general?
I would say leadership. Get into positions where you can get some leadership experience, even of your fellow students. That tends to go a long way.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
ultimately you want to make sure that you have someone who's actually going out of their way to find opportunities to add and contribute, right? Someone who can add, whether it's support to others and even simple things like community service. But I mean, showing that you're going out of your way and that you are not just going through the motions day to day just to get by, but you're actually trying to contribute. Those types of people are value add contributors to any team. Someone who really can be counted on to support others. And then ultimately, finding roles that, like Brian said, leadership, but even areas where you're allowed to critically think, problem solve, things like that. I know those are probably more on the second priority. You may not be able to get those immediately, but areas where you're actually responsible for something and you have to think about it, right? You're not just punching keys, or you're just someone who's maybe taking a mindless job, maybe for example. You actually have to do something. Those types of things are good qualities and things we might look for.
I look for 4 things when I'm sourcing candidates. The first is intelligence. Intelligence counts. And so you can, expand on that with knowledge. But I like to hire bright people because things only become more complex. The second is personality. I'm not looking for a particular personality, but I am trying to determine if they have any derailing personality traits. For example, are they negative? Are they focused on themselves? Is it difficult for them to make a decision because their need for detail or perfectionism is so prevalent that they can't make a decision? Are they such a painful introvert that it prevents them from communicating well? So I look more for derailing personality traits and how people manage those. The third thing is learning agility. I have to have people who have a very high learning agility, who are willing to continue to recreate themselves, because nothing else stays the same, so we shouldn't. And then the fourth is motivation. People have to bring their own engine, and I want people who have a huge engine. I think of life in terms of horses, so I'd rather put on a second set of reins instead of a big pair of spurs. So I want to hire someone with a big engine. Hard work has to be evident on the resume. You got to be able to grind. You've got to be able to have a large capacity. And then the other piece is, what's unique about you? Out of the sea of people I can hire, what experience have you had that's different? What passion do you have that's different? But figure out some unique component of yourself that you can leverage.
absolutely. And I think, during COVID, it's even more important to see what have you done during this time to really continue your growth and your learning. As we know, a lot of internships may not have been available due to COVID, but what did you do to stand out during this time? So did you take an extra course that aligned with your career journey, or did you volunteer remotely? I think that really helps stand out as well.
Great, thank you.
And Brooke, there is another question in the chat from Tiffany. And I don't know, you want to read the question, Brooke, or?
Yeah, sure. So Tiffany would like to know, and I think this is a really, really great question. This is something that always stumped me too. What are some good questions to ask at the end of the interview when they say, now, do you have any questions for us that will make a lasting impression?
Yeah, I could jump in here to kick it off. I'm sure we've all got some things that we kind of lean back on, but for me, it's not a specific question. I've got two specific things I try to do at the end of every interview, and I'll touch on those. But open-ended questions are a great way to kind of get the answers to the test, so to speak, right? So if I ask, if I'm doing an interview and someone asks me, you know, what do I see as the most challenging part of the job, or where do I think that this is going to go in the future? I'm going to tell you kind of where my head is at. And then, you know, as an interviewee, you really then have an opportunity to say, well, that's great. Let me tell you about a time I used that skill. Let me tell you about a time I can do exactly what you just told me you need this role to be. So it's a little way to create a dialogue and back and forth dialogue, but also they're telling you what they want to hear, and then you could just give it to them. It doesn't need to be they answer the question, you move on. But just real quick, the last two things I always try to include in an interview, one's a question, one's a statement. The first is, you know, just asking, is there anything that you wanted to know about me or my background that I didn't get a chance to answer? Which at first kind of seems like, hey, did you forget any questions? But I've asked that in plenty of interviews, and most of the time they go, no, we got everything on our list. But sometimes they'll say, yeah, actually, you know what, there's one thing I wanted to know about that we didn't get to. And then the last piece is make sure you tell them that you want the job. A lot of people will walk out of an interview and just assume, well, hey, I applied, you must know I want it. But say directly to the interview, and sometimes it gets a little awkward, just to restate it, I'm very interested in this. I want this opportunity. And even more so, tell them I know I can do this job if you give me an opportunity, and I just want to prove it. And it's really tough as an interviewer to have someone say that directly if it's said confidently, and then just brush that off. You tend to be inclined to give that person a shot.
Yeah, building off of those great suggestions, and I hope you wrote them down because they're very powerful. I'd offer a couple of more. Make sure you understand the direction of the company. Ask questions about things like, what are the plans for growth? What stands in the way of growth? What are the board or the CEO thinking in terms of new and different ways to reinvent the company? It has to be as good of a match for you as it does for them. So make sure you know what you're walking into. The second is, I ask a question and encourage others to ask this question: what are things I would learn once I was on the inside versus in the interview process? So fast forward, a friend, we're having dinner. What are some of the things I would learn that maybe might not be apparent to me right now? A similar but different question is people who struggle here, people who fail at this organization. Why is that? What do they have or don't have in terms of a mismatch that I should be aware of? One question I advise you not to ask. It's fashionable to ask, but I strongly advise you to not ask your interviewer something of the nature of, how do I fit against your expectations for this role? Or is there anything that you see in my background or my interview that doesn't make me a good candidate, et cetera? I love the question that was just posed in terms of, is there anything else I can tell you? The ones I shared put the interviewer on the spot. Maybe that's not the decision maker, or maybe they actually didn't like something and now you're asking them to give you difficult, candid feedback. It's really a way to change the feeling in the interview, and I advise not to do that. I can't tell you how many senior people ask me, even CEO candidates ask me that question, and I, being an executive coach, I often give them that feedback, but I'd stay away from that one.
Yeah, I think both of those are probably better than the response I was going to give. So use their advice. But I think ultimately, you know, I interview a lot of people as well, and it's you know, something maybe that rubs me the wrong way when people ask questions at the end of an interview that they say, you know, what do you like about this company, or something very broad and very general, has nothing to do with the role or the company itself and how it's operating. It's a very almost too broad of a question, right? When you start to open it up, I think that to that extent, it becomes less relevant, right? So you got to be able to tie it back somehow to how this role or how you know, the organization itself is operating. So just keep that in mind and try to make sure that you keep it within bounds. And the only thing that might be kind of a hybrid of that is, I do enjoy when people ask, you know, what is it about the culture that keeps you working at this company here? You know, the people that you're talking to are largely, they're not going to be people that have been there for 6 months. They're likely have been there for multiple years. And there's a reason why they work there, and the reason why they continue to work there. And the reason why they're hiring people to join that company. What is that? You know, and I think people, for the most part, are passionate about it, and they want to tell people. I want people to ask me why. So, you know, it allows them to at least spend some time talking about themselves and their organization. And that's good for you to understand where their passion lies. Because if that's not something that you're interested in, maybe that company isn't the right fit for you. You know, I think at some point you need to make sure that those questions you're asking at the interview are also a little bit selfish, right? To make sure that you're getting something out of it and that you're not just asking the question so that they like you enough to hire you, right? Let's make sure that you're getting enough information so that you do indeed want to be able to do exactly what Brian said and say, I want this job, I want this company, this belongs in my world. Otherwise, you know, you can go elsewhere. You can turn the offer down and move on. So that's my advice. A little bit different, but if there's any mock interviews, I suggest you do mock interviews. Certainly have that down. I'd say, you know, the interviews that I've done, make sure you've got a script almost of things to pull from in your head, regardless of the question they ask you. Make sure you know you've got examples tied to each one of those scenarios so that you can fire them off. If you have to think, you're in a world of hurt during an interview. Don't think.
Yeah, I would just echo the other panelists. I think it's so important to create a two-way conversation because it's just as much value for you as it is for a company. Thinking of a specific example, a couple months ago, I had a conversation with a student and it was a mock interview and we were talking and it was very conversational. He was asking me questions, he was providing me examples as we were going back and forth. And it turned out we were actually hiring for a internship position. And a couple weeks later, we actually offered him the internship just based on that mock interview and his ability to really have that conversation and keep it going. It was really great.
That's great. Thank you all so much. Those are great pieces of advice. And Tiffany, I hope that helps you when you go into your interviews. Another student has a question that I think is a great question. It's something that I often get asked when students are going off and looking into applying for the first time for new jobs. Sarah is asking, you know, what do you include when they say, tell me about yourself? You know, what happens in that 30-second elevator pitch? What should you actually say? There's a lot that you could probably tell them. So what are recruiters actually looking for in those kind of questions?
Sure, I guess I can go first here. I think it's similar to how you prepare for interviews. I think it's all about structure. Make sure that well, number one, you're going to have to rehearse it, right? So rehearse, understand that you got to keep it concise and linear, and to that point that you're hitting all the important items. So in terms of an elevator pitch, it should be, you know, who you are, where you came from, what you want to do, what you've done to get there, and then, you know, it should be pretty linear. And I know Kim's going to have some probably better, more probably specific information to how to structure this, but that's how I think of it personally. And it's going to be something that if you're not structured enough there, you have tendency to ramble. It'll go either longer than 30 seconds, or you'll not hit the points that you want to hit, and that you'll kick yourself afterwards wishing you had told them about. So make sure you've written it down or you've rehearsed it. You know yourself better than anyone else. Just make sure that you're hitting those points regardless of how you say it. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I would agree with Greg. And I think one of the good news is you're going to have a limited amount of time, right? So you maybe want to have a 30-second version, a 60-second version, maybe even 90 seconds if it's during an actual interview. And one of the good ways to do that, and I know, I'll do this if I'm doing presentations, to our executive team or whatnot, you have a certain amount of time. So what do I want to hit in that period of time? List all those things out, prioritize them. What are the 10 things about me I want them to know? Put them in order, and you're only going to get to some of them. So kind of, again, to Greg's point, this is really important. Rehearse that, time yourself. If you want it in 30 seconds, talk for 35 because you're going to be a little nervous. Your heart rate's going to be a little higher. So you're going to talk a little faster than you normally would. So that's one thing. The other big piece I would say is so often, I think everybody probably starts interviews the same way. Tell me about yourself. And I find myself constantly telling candidates, that's great speech, but I have your resume. Tell me about yourself. And especially if you're in an elevator, for this example, with someone, you got a chance to leave an impression. So are you just gonna, again, I think Greg's points are definitely what you want to make sure you hit, but also make sure you include at least one or two things that kind of let them know who you are as a person, so that they're not walking away going, okay, I just had a great, discussion with somebody and got their work history versus, I learned something about who this person is and could I see myself working with them with kind of what they gave me.
Yeah, I think it's sage advice from the two gentlemen who clearly have reached high levels of success. So I would take their advice, and then I offer a couple as well. The first piece is make sure you're high energy. It may be the 10th time you've said it, but it's the first time they have said it. So make sure that you are presenting something in a way that's compelling. And a question that I often advise folks to use really for presentations or even one-on-one engagements is, when I'm done, what do I want this person to do, to know, and to feel? And your word choice should be based on that, because we want to use tone and inflection, word choice, etc., to wrap and package the message so that we can actually manufacture that experience around what we want them to do, know, and feel. I would look at the role profile of the job you're applying for and highlight the 2 or 3 things that seem most important and weave that into your 30-second pitch based on parallels to your experience or characteristics that you possess. I would say that 1/3 is a warm-up, 1/3 is about some highlights of experience, 1/3 is about your most powerful characteristics. And as just said, with the prior person, I would include not only work pieces, but personal pieces as well. One last piece on this: have fun with the interview. If you're so nervous or consumed, then you're not going to be your best self. And if you can't be yourself, of course, in a professional way, but if you can't show yourself, then how do you test whether it's a good fit as well? So I think interviews are a wonderful way to make even more connections, even if you don't have the job. And if you walk in with the power of positivity and a light heart, and what a great opportunity, and then your mindset shifts and you show up as someone who's generally more capable and confident.
Great advice again. I feel like I'm always the last one to speak, but Kim gives wonderful advice, as well as the other panelists. So I would just say it is really important to echo that feedback. It is important to know the role that you're going into and be able to speak to that in that 30-second time frame. What have you done to stand out related to that role? How have you learned about this role if you don't have the experience? So what have you done to step out related to that?
Great. Thank you all so much. I know we've talked a lot about interviews, so I just want to ask a little bit more about if you can give the students some advice about resumes. How do they even get an interview, right? So what should they put on their resume to make sure that they're going to get that interview and then can successfully do those things?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think definitely, being from Ocean State Job Lot, we're a very philanthropic company. So I think for me, if it's an internship program, typically looking for, what is that volunteer experience that you've had to step out and really show how you could align to the value of the company. Additionally, any learning that you've taken related to an internship that you're interested in or a position, I think those kind of things are really important. So if someone's a business administration major, what courses have they taken that may be relative to the internship that they're looking for?
Yeah, great points. And I guess from my perspective, and this is kind of a funny one I was talking to. So my wife is the oldest of five, and her youngest sister just graduated, and her youngest brother is a sophomore up at Merrimack. And they were telling me about how, and Greg mentioned this earlier, the algorithms, how they read the resumes now, and they said how they put in, you guys probably already do this, right? You put in keywords and then you make them white, but you get picked up by the system. But I was kind of laughing and joking with them. I said, well, that's the advice I've always given people is, when we write job descriptions, I'm sure everybody, has gone through this. If I have to write a job description, it's important what I include in there as the scope of the work, because the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to go to someone within our HR department who's going to determine, okay, where does this fit in the company? How much money should we be willing to pay this person? So it is really, you have to put a lot of thought when you're writing a job description. So as a result, I say that to say, what's in there is important. It's what the people are looking for. It's what the job's going to be. So if there are keywords in there, especially key like active words, verbs, execute, analyze, lead, make sure that those also appear. And even if it's just that you're rewording one of the bullet points in your resume, make sure those are on there. Because yeah, maybe they'll get picked up by the computer system that's seeing them, but also eventually, hopefully, is going to get to someone who actually is interviewing you. They're going to see those things, and it's just, subconsciously it's going to go, okay, this is aligned with what I want and what I said I want this position to be.
Yeah, super advice. A couple of suggestions. One is judgment comes from a variety of experiences, large and small. And what I find when I'm either getting people ready for a C-suite position or coaching CEOs is that between the CEO and the boards, a lot of times people don't get the nod because they don't have good judgment. And that means they haven't been intentional about having a variety of experiences over time that they put in their memory banks and then draw and reuse and reapply to other situations. And so think about your resume as a launching pad of that. I know internships have been difficult. There's a group called Flick that you can do free internships, 10 hours a month. You can certainly do it with your course load. And if you do that each semester, by the time you're out, you have a number of different companies that you've worked with. And they're companies of either startups or more evolved companies. So think non-traditionally like that. Think about, and someone mentioned earlier, leadership experience through volunteering, et cetera. So your resume is your calling card, and you want to make sure that you are stuffing it with a tremendous amount of experiences. When you write it, make sure you just don't report on activities, report on impact and report on results, and strive for achievements. What type of recognitions can you achieve that signal to people that you are a differentiator? You're someone who not only works hard, but you get good results, and that's a big difference. And then lastly, send it to everybody. Send it to, in terms of your draft, get a lot of different perspectives and make sure it is correct grammatically. Grammarly or Paper Rater, you may be familiar with as part of tools for your own papers. But if there's something wrong in your resume, it's just an easy excuse for people to pull you out of a very large pile of things that they're looking at.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else additional to add here. I think those are the main points. Just make sure that you're doing your best to put the right level of experience there and highlight the important points, like Brian said, the keywords and things like that. But in terms of experience, in terms of building your resume, maybe that's the next step of that. If most of you are juniors and you're planning for your senior year, you better have something going on both semesters, whether it's a formal quote unquote internship or you have a job of some kind. You have to be doing something, and some, speaking from experience here, it's something that if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have probably gotten hired in the first place, in the first few companies that I had. Just going to school is not enough to cut it. You need to be balancing multiple priorities in order to showcase that you're capable of doing that. Because that's quite literally the first task you'll get as an incoming intern or new hire is going to be, here's multiple things you're going to have to do, and I need it all done, and you're going to have to do good at everything, but it's only going to come with prioritization, and you're going to have to bring a skill set of how you manage multiple requirements at the same time. So practice now while you're not getting paid per se to do it in your formal career. Do it with your classwork, your personal life, your internships, your local jobs, your community jobs, things like that. This is where you can really hone that skill set. So I hope that you understand the importance of that, because you're going to be tapping into it as much as you may not think of it right now. You're going to tap into it immediately in the workforce.
I want to ask Greg, I just want to ask you a follow-up question for that, because I know this has been a concern with a lot of students, and it came up a little bit, but I want to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about it directly. What about COVID, right? Like how am I going to get a job if COVID is going on? How am I supposed to be working right now if COVID is going on? So what do I don't, that gap in my resume, should I just tell the recruiter that that was the COVID semester, or how do I approach that?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to preface this by saying this. This is going to be much more blunt than I think you probably want to hear it. But from an employer perspective, and maybe myself included, that's not going to cut it. I think there's got to be some level of rationale beyond, hey, COVID happened and I couldn't do X, Y, Z. We're all involved in that, including the employers. So, this is something you can't be relying on as a quote unquote excuse, because that's what it's going to look like. You need to be trying your best to find those opportunities, and despite of COVID, you can still do a ton of things, right? A lot of internships are remote. You may not be, like, for example, when restaurants closed, a lot of, waitress and waiter jobs, might have gone by the wayside. That's understandable, right? Those things are direct impacts. But, does it mean that you can't have other remote positions and things like that? There are plenty of other opportunities. And like Brian said earlier, it doesn't have to be the perfect one. As long as you have something there that shows that you're trying, is really all you need. You need something that you're going to be able to apply yourself to. And again, avoid that excuse of saying, I did nothing because I had an out. That is not the type of person we want to bring in our organization, particularly at a lower level. So I don't want to scare anyone here, because I know a lot of you are in that situation right now, but there are still many alternatives and many options. So don't limit yourself. You just may have to look a little harder, get more support from those around you, particularly the alumni base and people you're talking to now. We can try and help you through this. But it's a little tough, but at the same time, Brian, myself, and Brooke all graduated right after the market completely tanked in 2008. So if we can do it, you can do it. That's my word of advice.
And where he says he doesn't want to scare you, I will scare you. The response I have to that, if I hear that from a candidate, is, wow, that's interesting but irrelevant. Because I want people who are creative thinkers, who work to find solutions in the face of adversity, who dig deep in times of difficulty and work to reinvent themselves. I'm a big buck up, buttercup, let's go at it harder kind of person. You can't be wildly successful in life by dealing with what's given to you. You have to make something of it. And, maybe it's not work experience, but maybe it's learning a second language, or you've done a tremendous amount of volunteering and you worked on these skills. Spin it into a story, but don't take what's given to you. Manufacture opportunities based on you pushing and asking and prevailing. And as I just mentioned, I mentioned Flick, that's free, 10 hours a week, online internships, working with real companies. There's a ton of opportunities like that. So I say in those instances, don't pull away, go harder.
And just to echo what they said, I'm not going to add much to it, but I wouldn't just apply that to this scenario, right? That is, when you get into your career, you're going to have plenty of times where you're given a goal, and the goal of an internship is to get some experience, right? And for something outside of your control, COVID, you weren't able to reach that specific goal. So show me how you got as close as you could creatively. Same thing, if you're given a project and all of a sudden, there's, in our business all the time, we'll see we've got certain targets we've got to hit, and then there are weather impacts. Transportation can't get where it needs to be. But what did we do to get as close as we could? And so it's always kind of, don't just come with, I didn't get there, but here's why it's not my fault. It's, I didn't get there, here's why it's not my fault, because it is a reason, and you should make sure everybody's aware of it. But here's what I did to try to get as close as I could and make up and add some value.
Yeah, absolutely. Not much to add either. But again, how did you elevate yourself and use this pandemic as a way to continue your growth? So as Kim mentioned, there's online internships, there's online volunteer experience. I know, speaking from Ocean State Job Lot, currently we're hiring for 10 remote internships for the summer because we don't know the outlook of what the pandemic has in store. So I would just say continue to elevate yourself and, go harder, as Kim mentioned.
Thank you all so much. There's another question from a student in the chat that I want to bring up. I think this is a really good point as well. So when you're looking at a resume, how does experience affect your view of the candidate? And she's specifying here, she's saying specifically, can somewhat unrelated experience, where important skills and experiences were still learned, can that be as impactful as directly related experience? How do you sell that on a resume?
Yeah, I'll take this one, or at least kick it off. And I think it's going to be specific to the job, right? And so I work, a lot of what I do on a daily basis is in strategy. So there doesn't necessarily have to be that specific example. Now, if you're an accounting major, at least from what the limited amount I remember from accounting and talking to our accountants, there's certain things you need to know. There's like right answers to stuff. So in that case, you probably do need some technical experience. But my biggest piece of advice is, just because maybe you don't have it, you never know. Still throw your hat in the ring. I was recently hiring for a manager position where we needed expertise in final mile transportation that we didn't have in our company. And I told everybody up front internally, look, you're more than welcome to apply. We'll interview you, but we are looking for this technical experience. We found somebody with that technical experience. But in the meantime, we got approval for a second headcount. And there were some folks that I think probably, if they knew we were actually, that second role is a little more leadership, it's a little more, it doesn't have to be as technical, would have definitely put their name in. But because they didn't, we just had the initial group of candidates who said, you know what, I know I don't have it, but I'm putting my name in anyway. And we ended up hiring and promoting one of them. So just because you don't have it, don't let that scare you away. But sometimes it may just be job specific.
Yeah, I think, Brian's exactly right. If it's technical, it's technical, right? There's no way around that. You're going to need people that know how specifically how to do those things. And understand that there's always going to be a challenge of finding the perfect candidate, right? That's not always going to be the case. And a lot of people are frequently, I mean, if you look at the vast majority of roles that are being filled at any given time across an organization, a lot of the people taking those jobs are stretch roles, whether they're being promoted, whether they're coming in from other departments or they're coming in off the street. I mean, these people haven't done that specific job before, right? They're being stretched in one form or fashion or another, whether it's technically, whether it's culturally or anything else. So this is something that, you can always train on, and Kim knows this better than anyone else here, but you can train the specifics, right? It's the person you can't necessarily train. The personality, the traits that they have, the characteristics, the skills that they bring, the experience they have from before, right? Those things you're going to bring with you regardless. It's the technical stuff and what you do on the day-to-day basis and how that company works. Train all that stuff. Don't try to come into the interview knowing all of it. You're not. And I think lastly, in terms of, the specifics of how do you tie unrelated stuff to getting yourself this job? I always think of this one example. When I was interviewing, not just at my first job, but my second job 3 years later, I used examples of problem solving examples to a project we had in supply chain, was it 355, one of the first classes you take in supply chain, where we had to build a catapult with Professor Crows, who's no longer there. He's at Boise State. And I think Brian remembers that project. That's probably the first time he's heard that in a while, but you had to build a catapult and shoot these little balls, and you had to hit a target. And it was all about process efficiency and how do you make something, given a certain amount of materials and manufacture something to meet a process. And we had to do all these things. And I was able to tie this specific random thing and show how we, as a team, managed this issue and solved the problem. And as long as I articulated it correctly, I was able to mold it into the type of scenario that fit this job requirement. And it's a little bit of spin, but it's relevant. And I think those are the kinds of things you need to start thinking about that are non-traditional. Doesn't need to be part of your job specific thing that you're doing. You can tie in projects, you can tie in personal life and mold it into something creative. That's something that makes an impression. So yeah, I don't know if that was more confusing, but hopefully it helps.
Nicole, I want to be respectful of you always going last, so I'll wait until you offer.
No, your advice is wonderful. I don't mind going after. But I would just echo, it's very important to really make sure that, excuse me, sorry, the chats are kind of throwing me off a little bit. But when you have unrelated experience, during interviews as an HR professional, we typically ask, situational questions. So how can you apply any experience that you may have had outside of this specific role to these situational questions? So a project, as my peers mentioned, I think it's really important to be able to relate this experience, and it kind of shows, how you align to the company, your values. So that's really what we look for in the interviews, is asking those situational questions.
Great. So 3 responses to this. The first one is picking up of what Greg mentioned. I refer to that as transferable skills. So think about what the core skills that you can develop are, such as decision-making, problem solving, analytical skills, good writing skills, good ability to articulate, things that you can develop in a number of mediums that can get reapplied time and time again. Which leads me to my second suggestion, which is I just published an article with another group of experts at Forbes on this very topic. And so if you go to my LinkedIn, I will have shared that article. And it talks specifically, and there's 10 people, no, maybe 6 people who are experts in this space that give advice on that. But capitalize on transferable skills. The other thing I would capitalize on is this concept of learning agility. You may have heard that I select people based on intelligence, personality, motivation, and learning agility. And so what I would do is, if I am faced with an area I don't have competence in, but I have a high learning agility, I will give specific examples about how I went into situations with some knowledge and had to pivot, and the things I did to come up to speed very quickly, and how that's part of my brand and how I'm known for that. And so you're as a interviewer, you're hiring for the moment, but things change all the time. And so while I may want to fill a gap I have, I want to find someone who's going to challenge themselves to grow with the organization. And I think emphasizing those elements will instill confidence in an interviewer that you aren't just a good bet for today, but you're a good bet for tomorrow as well.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. I know we're running short on time, but there are a few other questions that I'm hoping maybe just one of you could pop in and answer. And then there's two more. So one of them is, what do you consider outdated experience? So when should they start taking stuff from, high school off of their resume, or how long should they keep something on their resume?
As long as it's on there for a reason. If you just expect to be asked about it and expect that, just as long as you think that answering that question will add value to your chances, it can be on there.
Great. Thank you. And the other question is, what about the cover letter? This isn't something that we had a chance to discuss. So if we can discuss the cover letter, what are the most important aspects you look for? What makes it a really good cover letter?
Can I just ask a question? Are people really still doing cover letters? I have to really honestly ask that question. And because people that do send me cover letters, I really don't read them. Or I look over them and I say, I appreciate you spending the time here, but I know for a fact that you ultimately have a template for this. You plugged in some words. I'm skipping over that part. So I'm just curious, if companies are really saying I need a cover letter and I need it to address XYZ, then I'm more curious about that than I am the actual, what you put in it and all that.
No, I think that's a really good question. I've seen both. So I have seen some companies will say, that you need to upload a cover letter, but more frequently it's not becoming a piece that needs to be added. So yes, that's true.
There's a study that says there's less than 5 seconds people are spending on a full 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So less than 5 seconds. So make sure that your input is laid out in a way that's very effective. And again, Google ways to lay out for optimal use of space. I would include a couple of things that immediately identify with the company if you're a user of that product, or you've heard something recently in the headlines, something compelling. And then what are the 2 or 3 things that are differentiators of you over others? And I would just make sure that those are positioned in a very powerful but concise way.
Yeah, don't be afraid to break it into bullet points. Like Kim said, if it's something we got to look at quickly, I'm not trying to read 4 paragraphs or even a paragraph. So the bullet points of just hit me what I need to know. I'm more likely to read it.
Yeah, I'd just add in, I'm on the same page. I don't necessarily, I'll read through a cover letter and if it's good, but what I would suggest, if you can, is don't necessarily say, here's why I'm a good fit for the job, that sort of thing. Tell me what you're going to do. When I have people apply for jobs, I said, I don't want that. I want your plan. Give me your plan of what you're going to do. And even if you don't know that much about the job, it can just be, I'm going to learn, I'm going to work with, relevant people in the business. So if you're going to include something as an attachment, if it can be a plan of here's what I'm going to do if I get this job, I find that to be more powerful.
Yeah, and Greg, just to answer your question from an HR perspective at Ocean State Job Law, I know we do not require cover letters. And I do want to just speak to the importance, I know we haven't touched on it much, of like a follow-up after an interview. So if you do get that interview, following up and saying, why you feel you align to this company as well as the position you applied for. I think that's a lot of value. So I just wanted to be sure to communicate the thank you letter is very important and valuable.
And I'll go off of that and just say thank you all so much for joining us today. I know we're running short on time because our career fair is going to be starting in about 5 minutes, and I want to make sure that students can get prepared to go to that fair. But Nicole, Brian, Kim, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. And all of the panelists who join us today, their information is up on our College of Business career day site. So if you want to see their LinkedIn information and maybe reach out to them on LinkedIn, that would be a good first move. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you at the career fair.
Great. Thanks
Awesome.
for having us.
Thanks everybody.
Good luck, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one student.
All right, I'm gonna head out
Sorry,
to
my computer's like frozen.
Samantha, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't need anything from us before you left. So no, it's good. Okay, well, since you don't, Brooke, great
Thanks,
session.
Carmen.
Thank you so much.
much.
Have a great afternoon. I will be talking to you soon, I'm sure.
Yes, I'll see you at 3.
Bye.
Bye.